From Hamilton Place Strategies in Washington, D.C., this is the HPS Insights Podcast.
Welcome to HPS Insights, a podcast from Hamilton Place Strategies analyzing the current events impacting the business and political communities. I'm your host today, Brian DeAngelis, a managing director here at HPS, teaming up with Stacy Kerr, one of our partners here, for another edition of the HPS Book Club series.
Yeah, hey Brian. I'm looking forward to this conversation with Mike.
We're really excited about this conversation. We are hosting today Mike Hayes, the former commanding officer of SEAL Team 2, a White House fellow and former director of defense policy strategy at the National Security Council. After his distinguished military and government service, Mike went on to top positions at Bridgewater Associates, Cognizant Technology, and he's currently the Chief Digital Transformation Officer at VMware. Mike, welcome to HPS Insights, and thanks for joining us today.
Brian, thanks for having me. Stacy, thank you as well. And congratulations, first of all, and thank you for all the incredible impact that you both and HPS has had. I'm a huge fan.
Well, Mike, I think it's safe to say you're the first Navy SEAL we've ever had on HPS Insights. And to be honest, some of our listeners might find that a bit unusual considering the guests that we typically have on the program. But you've written a great book here about teamwork, leadership, service called Never Enough. So much of that can be applied here today.
Yeah, Mike, I've spent the last week reading the book, and I found myself recognizing over and over again, almost every chapter, a lot of the things we teach here at HPS. We sort of pride ourselves on bringing in young talent, teaching them and training them in the way we work and how to succeed both in Washington and in public affairs. And I saw a lot of overlap, but I'll be honest, I learned a few new things as well that I think we can all benefit from. And I think we'll get lots of copies of this book to share around the office. But why don't you start? Tell us about the book, what you hope to accomplish with it, what motivated you to share this now?
Well, Brian, thanks for asking. First of all, I would start with the title. Never Enough can sound like fame and fortune. It's intentionally provocative. It's not fame and fortune. It's about meaning and impact. And I've been really fortunate to live a life of hundreds, if not thousands, of once-in-a-lifetime experiences. And I'm really passionate about sharing and giving back. So for me, the book was all about a window into not only insights of specific events, but most importantly, trying to make the stories and the concepts relatable so that if you're not a SEAL or you're not working in the White House Situation Room, that you can still draw from it and say, how does it apply to my life? It's really part business, part leadership, part memoir, part inspiration. And for me, it is genuinely about giving back. One of the things I would also highlight is that I started a 501c3 that pays off mortgages for all Gold Star families. And all of my profits from this book are going to the charity, paying off mortgages for the Gold Star families.
That's wonderful work. And I wanna spend some time at the end of the show talking about that because that's great work you're doing.
Yeah. And Mike, so not everybody in the military or government service or in the private sector will have the experiences you've had. So sharing them is certainly important as you just laid out. But what can people take away from this book to help them in their careers wherever they sit?
I think one of the main themes in the book is that leaning into the hard things is where the learning and the growth comes from. So in the SEALs, we certainly move to the problem. It's what I've also seen done sometimes really, really well in Washington, D.C., and sometimes less than well. And so I think that, a lot of people look at like success and failure as binary. One of the things, Brian, that as you would know that I wrote about is failure is only failure if you fail and don't learn. If you fail and learn and you try something hard, you're going to have that feedback loop where you improve and you do the thinking, the reflection and the objectivity about what you did so that as you move through, life, just broadly, professional, personal, whatever, that we're all getting better all the time. And then what I would say is it's not about getting better so that we just ourselves pull ourselves up. I think it's about really becoming better so that we can make others better. When I applied for the White House Fellowship, I still very vividly remember one of the essays was very simply, why do you want to be a White House Fellow? And it was one of those 200-word answers, which we all know is harder to write than 1,000-word
hardest question. Yeah.
Yeah. And my answer was simple. It was that I don't want to just positively impact people. I want to positively impact people to go positively impact others. And you create that nonlinear effect that is great for the nation.
That point you made a few times in the book about doing the hard things, getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. It's something we preach a lot here, and we hire, and they'll be starting in a few weeks, 15 to 20 recent college grads every year. And, a big push in that first year is, you're a great writer. Let's work on PowerPoint and Excel. Oh, you hate math? Let's really get you into some data analysis. And it's something that really stuck out to me in the book. The other lesson that really jumped out at me was this story about Reed, a young SEAL you were working with on, I believe it was an energy power saving project. And when to recognize how it's more important to let others stand up and take ownership of something they've been working on than necessarily the next up in command. The managing director has to speak to the client, or the commander has to speak to the secretary. Tell us more about your thinking about that and how you approach that in both business and government.
Absolutely. First of all, Brian, it's cliche that leaders accept more of the blame and less of the credit. It's cliche for a reason. But so let's set that aside and say, really, what does it actually mean? What it really means is comfort with your organization. When you can take in this story, for example, a 22-year-old new SEAL to go brief the Secretary of the Navy on what the SEALs were doing with green energy, that takes some confidence in the 22-year-old. Right. But then what it really takes is also the ability to recognize that what's the worst that's going to happen here? That, to my former point, if you fail and learn, you're going to have a great lesson that you're going to be able to improve from. So I think a lot of times people don't try those hard things because they don't go that last little step of visualizing what people think failure is like. And so, if we really try something hard, how many of us have friends and family that are going to actually think less of us for trying the really hard thing and then failing? If those people are going to think less of us, we don't need to be around them. And so to me, the leadership component of that is helping inspire people to try the hard thing, but also building a culture where they're comfortable understanding that individuals can fail, but while an organization doesn't.
Yeah. And Mike, in the book, you focus on flexibility and agility, leading and following. And I think that's, I think the word "and" there is so important. I think it's maybe one of the most important words. And as we all navigate these new sort of dynamic landscapes, it can be both, not or. And so can you talk a little bit about how does this translate from your SEAL stories into your corporate experience? There's, you talk in part of the book, how we must all be leaders and followers, and how to know when to be which. And that's a key part of leadership, right? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, Stacey, great topic. The key thing is the last thing you said, which is knowing when to do which. We all have heard about servant leadership and moving back. Ultimately, growing up in both the SEALs and now 10 years in the private sector, I have learned to need no credit in that, because the way the organization performs is either my success or my less than success. And so it's not about me. It's about what does the organization, what does the team do? I never say somebody works for me. My whole life, I've only said I work with people. That preposition is really seems like a small 3-letter words, but it really changes the dynamics about how to think about teams.
I agree.
So I think a lot of people will call themselves either leaders or they'll say, yes, I know how to follow. The tricky part is knowing when to move forward, when to move back. Stacey, to me, the right answer to that is thinking about what the cost of failure is. If it's a SEAL operation that can't go wrong, you're going to put the A team in. Like your absolute best of the best is going to be in the right positions. But we're all trying to learn and grow. And so, how do you take that PowerPoint person and the Excel person and the reader and the writer, and put them into the different situations like you just talked about, Brian? Like that's growth. And so, in the corporate world, what we try to do is think about succession planning and say, is the second line ready to kind of step up and be the first line? And the only way the second line can really become ready to be the first line is by getting some reps in the gym, if you will. And that's what, it takes leaders to be comfortable saying, hey, second line, like you move forward and you own this, because look, it's not going to be, if it does go sideways or fails, then it's not going to be catastrophic for the business. So it's said succinctly, it's the judgment between knowing when the cost of failure can be borne or not.
Mike, correct me if I'm wrong here, but you made several points along those lines throughout the book, and I came away as a reader with a sense of there was a lot that you learned through your SEAL training and your SEAL service. But there were other things that really stuck out to me, like your decision when you first became commander of SEAL Team 2 to fly out to Coronado and attend the graduation of the new graduates. That stuff felt more to me like instinct or something you knew that you didn't learn through the SEALs, but maybe learned through other parts of your life.
Through your parents. Yeah, it sounds like something you learned from your parents and your upbringing.
My mom is a serial helper of people and a works in the social impact arena through her whole life and career. And look, I really have grown up, whether it was my mom, my dad, my grandparents, whomever, being able to think about the word empathy, which really means looking at yourself through the lens of somebody else and say, what is going to inspire? What's the outcome that you're trying to achieve? And if you really deeply believe in the one team concept or equity of both opportunity and availability and treating people like they're all important to the cause, really, I think it's so critical to be able to see what you're doing through the lens of somebody else. A lot of things make sense or don't make sense to ourselves, but we have these unconscious biases that sometimes it takes a lot of work to say, how do I think differently? How do I surround myself with people who don't think like me so that you can make better decisions and ultimately, make people feel welcome and you get the best out of the team when everybody, while some are new and some have different abilities and skills, everybody is bringing something to the table. And how do you get the best out of those people in that one team effort is really, really something every SEAL grows up learning how to do.
I want to jump in on a quick follow-up there, and then I'll let Stacy ask another one. There were also several examples of, for lack of a better term, SEALs who made some serious mistakes, who warranted discipline. And from my understanding, you could have easily made a decision to send them home, kick them out, get the distraction out of the way. But you took a different path. And to that last point, you saw something valuable in them that you wanted to pull out. How do you take that lesson and apply that to your work in corporate America and government service as well?
Great question, Brian. I think it has to start with the assessing I'll call it the shortcoming or the infraction or whatever that negative word is, and saying, is it character and values or is it an abilities question? And when somebody doesn't have the character or the values or the integrity that you need for your organization, that's a red line. Like there's just no debating that. And that has to be hived off and moved out of an organization. Now that usually is hopefully is the smaller of the two cases. The better case is, hey, somebody just didn't have the right abilities to go do something. And so how do you invest in that person? While we hear the word discipline and can think like, a lot of negative words, discipline can actually be a really positive word. And to flip it and say, okay, it's an opportunity to learn. As a leader, I might feel really good by, hypothetically raising my voice at somebody or choosing words that are really harsh. That does nothing. I never do that. And the reason I don't is because I'm thinking about, what do I need the organization to be in the future? And how do I help the person see what should happen the next time? And then get rid of that either that ignorance or retrain something and invest in people so they can become better. In full disclosure, I've dealt with both sides of those equations. I had a situation where, everybody's heard of the newspaper test. And if your actions were on the front page of the paper, are you proud or not? I've lived that. I mean,
think about that a lot.
Yeah, I think about it a lot. And I woke up one day and front page of the New York Times headline said, SEALs a beating death and a cover up or something like that. And I was like, okay, well, that happened. That happened in my time in Afghanistan. And I knew that I would be fine in that article. It wasn't a flattering article for the SEALs. every great organization has challenges to work through. What defines an organization to me isn't whether or not they have hard situations, it's how they handle them. That's what defines an organization. And to me, I went on record in this particular case recommending that these 4 SEALs be moved out of the SEALs. And so, look, I would, I mean, the people listening can Google it and read for themselves, but I would argue that I'm one of the few people in that article that came out on the right side, on the positive side of that.
Yeah, Mike, you share a few stories in the book of also certainly your time disciplining or making choices on that, but also times when you made choices to push back on your superiors and following your instincts versus an order. And I think, that's probably surprising to most people as they think about SEALs as never, disregarding orders. What led you to make those decisions, and why do you think you were able to sort of get away with that?
Good question. For the audience who's a little less familiar, we won't have spoiler alert here, but what I would say in this particular situation, what you're always looking at is the risk that you're going to assume to do something worth assuming. Now, we have sometimes tensions between high level policy and then the execution of policy. Right. And so sometimes, I'm somebody who's been in DC in the sit room and been on the front lines in Afghanistan and Iraq. And it's funny because no matter what side you're on, you think the other side doesn't quite understand what you're doing, and it's just natural. It's a natural built-in tension, thousands of miles away. The answer to your question more directly, Stacey, is that having the confidence to push back is really something that comes from experience growing up and also being ready to make a decision that you will pay the consequences for. In this, the quick story here is that there was a situation where the policy was go back in and look at boots on the ground battle damage assessment so that we know that we didn't harm any civilians, which of course we never wanted to do and would never be the goal. But the policy made sense because it had a chilling effect on making sure that we had minimized civilian casualties. Particular night, it wasn't the smart thing to do. It was a single choke point road, known to be laden with explosives. I got ordered to send these U.S. service people back down into this situation. And I said, no, it's not worth risk. It's worth assuming. A very senior person who I'll leave unnamed said, nope, you have to do this. And I continued to push back and said, we won't do it. It doesn't make sense. This general ended up ordering the Afghan army to go down and to do this. And unfortunately, 2 of the 3 vehicles got massively blown up. One of them completely vaporized. And then it was several Afghans were killed. And one of the most emotional days of my life, I've had many, but was flying to go back to see this team. These were Special Forces Green Berets, incredible Americans, and sitting down with this team. And then the 12 of them closing the door with me and we just talking the day after. And man, even now it just really brings back strong memories around these Green Berets saying, hey, sir, there's not too many senior leaders in the military that would do what you just did. And at least half of us are still here in this room. At least half of us are still here in this room today because of your decision.
That was great leadership. It was a really moving story in the book, and I appreciate you sharing it. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, Mike, I want to talk a little bit about some current events. I want to talk about President Biden's Afghanistan policy, and I also want to talk about the great work you're doing with Gold Star families. So we'll be right back. You're listening to HPS Insights.
Every Friday, Hamilton Place Strategies founding partner Tony Fratto joins John Fagan and Brendan Walsh of Markets Policy Partners for the HPS Macrocast, an in-depth look at the macroeconomic news driving the week. Check out the latest episode at hamiltonplacestrategies.com/podcast.
We're back on HPS Insights. Our guest today is Mike Hayes, author of Never Enough. And we're talking about his experience in the Navy SEALs, his work as a White House fellow and his corporate America. And Mike, we're really excited to have you here today. I want to talk a little bit about politics before we let you go. It's what we focus on so much living here in Washington, as I'm sure you're well aware. And I do want to get your take on President Biden's recent decision to withdraw U.S. troops from Afghanistan. You published a piece, I think last week, on Time Magazine's website supporting the decision. And without being presumptuous, I have to assume that's not an easy position for you to take or popular among a lot of the folks you served with. But why do you think it was the right decision for President Biden to take?
Yeah, ultimately, and like I said in that article in Time, I was interviewed in the 9th year of the war by the Wall Street Journal, embedded reporter in the middle of Afghanistan, and said, nations are really good at starting wars and really bad at ending them, and we'll need a political settlement. Almost more than a decade later, no political settlement. What we really need to think about is the forward-looking use of our resources, and comparing that to our strategy. And so as our strategy changes, the question is, are we using our resources in the right way? And so one of the things that I talked about is that it's hard to measure the opportunity cost of where we spend our resources. And it's also embedded in that cost benefit analysis. It's really hard to appreciate the positive value that comes with resting and refitting and training the forces. And it's really easy to say, oh, that was only 2,500 people, servicemen and women that we wanted to leave behind in Afghanistan. But look, that's a lot large. That number's low, but by the time you add all the layers of staff attention and all the way across the layers and contractors, et cetera, it's not 2,500 people. It's actually quite larger, and that brought me to the point of let's make sure we're using the right metrics. In the private sector, my job now is to, as I help run a really large business, is to say, let's use data and make sure we're staring at the right data and thinking about if we're having the impact we want to have. Look, 20 years, we're at a stalemate, and it's my personal opinion that there are really two policy reasons. There's to be into Afghanistan. There's the essence of the question was really transnational terrorism. When we entered Afghanistan, we thought it was a hotbed. It was a hotbed for transnational terrorism. Now that has, by and large, moved to other places that are whether Africa, other parts of Central Asia, et cetera. And the Department of Defense is incredible. They're pursuing in ways that I both know and don't know, to keep pressure on those networks, and that's what they're focused on, very rightly so, and awesome leadership.
Quick follow-up, and then I'll kick it to Stacey. These decisions are hard for a president to make, and you've been in that room, in the situation room, around big decisions like our START treaty, around nuclear weapons, and we're all well familiar with the politics of today that just make any decision hard. Never mind, cross-party politics and trying to get people to agree. What lessons do you have from your experience, or can you share with today's political leaders or today's staff, today's White House fellows, of how to get people to come together on some of these tough asks that they have?
It is the most important question. And figuring out, look, our founding fathers made this nation so that half the country would be really happy and half the country would be less than happy on who are making decisions in whatever branch.
It's a good way to describe it. Yeah.
And so we need to embrace that. That is our system. And so the question is, how can we, press forward on what we all believe should happen as individuals? That's what makes the democracy. That's the foundation and fabric of our democracy. But Brian, you hit on something that I think is the most foundational, which is, how do we do a better job of not making the world a 0 or a 1? And that is, to me, one of the most important issues in Washington that is not getting addressed. And let's take, for example, the infrastructure spending. Should we spend $1.9 trillion or $3 trillion? The way that I would think about it, and this is going to be intentionally simplistic and Pollyannish, but if we imagine a poll where you asked Americans, would you rather win or lose 50% of the time, and then have a lot less volume move through of progress move through the system,
right?
Or would you rather have more compromise and a lot more volume and velocity for transforming the nation and moving us to where we need to get to? I think any economist would look at GDP, which is just labor times productivity, which comes from policy. That person would say, no, the velocity is better off. I'm using the infrastructure bill as a metaphor.
Sure.
But 1.9 or 3.0. So if we first ask the question about would all 330 million Americans rather have compromise, we need to get that answer to be a yes. So that comes from changing that. There are many different angles. Media. It comes from better data, better education around the issues. It comes from better awareness, evidence-based decision making, and influence. And so, to me, I think then what you do is, if we could agree as a nation that, look, I'd rather get the velocity and the volume through the system to make progress for the country. Then once that agreement is made, then you can take, okay, what are the issues that are very clearly right or left, or whatever dichotomy you want to use between, let's say, 1.9 and 3.0, and how do you come together and talk about what's in that rough middle of that could go either way? And look, elections have results, whether whoever party is in power, it shouldn't be 50-50. Whenever the leadership it tilts a certain way, that should reflect the voice of America. And policy should tilt the way that the citizens have voted. And so but to me, the world can't be a 0 or a 1, and we need to figure out a better way to drive toward a compromise type of solutions. And look, I know it's Pollyannish, but just very simplistically, that's
a great point.
That's my view.
And Mike, let me ask you one thing on that. If you could sort of tell the leaders in Washington today one thing, if you could get them to change one thing that they're doing, what would that be?
It would
move towards that direction. Get them to move towards that direction.
Stacey, it's awesome. It is my answer will be very boring. It is very simply that empathy point we made before, and communication, and actually understanding what the word compromise really means.
Yeah.
Great answer.
Well, Mike, something everybody can agree on, I know, is the support for the sacrifices that the families of the men and women that you have served with have to make. And I know it's a place where you spend your time and your resources. And even though your military careers ended, you still spend a lot of time helping those families through the 1162 Foundation. Tell us about that foundation and what it does and how others can help.
Well, thank you again for asking that, Stacey. The 1162 Foundation is named after the day that JFK started the SEALs, January 1st of 62. And it's also a little bit representative of what Gold Star families need, which is, January 1st is, new year, new you kind of thing, renewal and moving forward. These families have paid the ultimate sacrifice. And so I, like every SEAL of my era, have buried far too many friends. You may see 2 flags over my left shoulder. Those are meaningful flags to me. But every service person who has been overseas or supported from the continental U.S. has been involved in these types of situations, and it's all about taking care of those who we will never forget. So for me, that's ultimately why I wrote the book. It was a challenging decision in some regards, because you have to put yourself out there. You have to be vulnerable. No one wants to read a book about how great someone is. And so, you can't be the president of your own fan club. You need to pull out and say, what did I learn? And that usually comes from mistakes. What would I do differently? What would I do better? And that takes vulnerability and openness. And as I've gotten older, I've become much more comfortable with that. But the way to get involved, Stacey, first of all, is to think about service, whether you're in the service or not. Don't just go thank a service person. Go think about whatever service makes sense to you as an individual. We all have different interests and abilities, very rightfully so. How do we have a million-ish person DOD. How do the other 329 million Americans serve? We pick your own ways. Get off the sidelines. I don't care what it is. Go cut fire breaks in a forest somewhere, or Teach for America, or whatever it is. Become an owner in the country. That would be the best way to help. That's what the message of a Never Enough is ultimately about, is pulling us up. And so for me, that's what I get really passionate about, is trying to make us better as a nation. Secondly, I would say, to answer your question more literally, is, hey, help me get the book out there. I'm not making a penny on the book on Never Enough. It's all going to this great cause around that literally pays off the mortgages for Gold Star families. The foundation bought our 5th house right around Thanksgiving for a woman who lost her husband in the middle of the war in Afghanistan. She got back on her feet with a small business, lost it during the pandemic. She and her kids were legit homeless until our foundation bought her a house. It was one of those 5 days are some of the best days of my life.
Wonderful work.
Yeah.
It's great.
Well, it's a great way to help such a noble and great cause while learning a ton. And I think that's the biggest piece. You're not just calling people to help. You're giving them a lot of great insight, and you're doing exactly as you set out to do, Mike, in this, is sharing that perspective from these really unique opportunities that you've had in your life.
I think we have to leave it there. As a Boston College grad, it's hard to say this to a Holy Cross man, but this is one of the most impressive conversations I think we've had on HPS Insights, and you've had a remarkable career. It is a great book. I strongly encourage all our listeners to check out Never Enough, a Navy SEAL Commander on Living a Life of Excellence, Agility, and Meaning. I loved the book. I think our listeners and folks who follow us at HPS will as well. So Mike, thank you for coming on. Love to have you back on soon.
Brian and Stacy, thanks to each of you. Genuine and deep, meaningful thanks for all that you each and your organization does for this great nation. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Mike.
Great. Thank you all to our listeners. You can find out more about the book and a link to where to purchase it, information on Mike on our website at hamiltonplacestrategies.com or by following us on Twitter at HPS Insight. I'm your host, Brian DeAngelis, with Stacy Kerr. Thanks as always for listening to HPS Insights.
Thank you for listening to the HPS Insights podcast, produced by Hamilton Place Strategies. For the latest updates, follow us on Twitter at HPS Insights and follow us on the web at hamiltonplacestrategies.com.